soothing. We could just stay on this lovely picture, couldn't we, really?
It's very nice.
Absolutely. I'll just go to the slideshow. Okay, yes. So recently retired clinical psychologist in the NHS. And one of the things that I've wanted to focus on is climate psychology, as it is a burgeoning field, a very important one, in terms of thinking about why we've got in the mess that we have. And that will also give us some clues as to how we need to get out of it. I think the first slide here, hold on, have you got, are you seeing this? Right. Shall I just, are you seeing your own faces, Harry and Jane? I'll just check. Is it all right? Yeah.
Sorry, I'm on mute. It's fine. I can see
yes.
the presentation. And
that's great.
I can't
Good.
see me. Yeah.
Yes, good, because I can see you guys across my. So yeah, okay. So 30 years of warming, and we haven't bent the curve. A lot of people will know this hockey stick graph on the right, which is very alarming. But it's remarkable how people still don't feel very much when they see graphs. Their intellectual mind might take it in and be interested and maybe a little bit alarmed, but it's actually quite horrifying. And then some people can feel a lot of feelings. A big thing about climate psychology is why it is that the curve just isn't bending. I mean, we'll all have our own theories about that. And obviously there's huge political global reasons. So I'm really just talking about the climate psychology of it, which is very much what they call psychosocial. So it's not just at the individual level, it's at the cultural level, global level even. So the theories translate to all these different levels, and that's really the case in most psychological theories. That, you know, a lot of people think it's just about the individual. A lot of people think psychology is just about mental health, but actually, well, that is clinical psychology, but climate psychology is very much about this psychosocial kind of theories. And a lot of it is really about thinking about why all levels are not taking action, and beginning to think about how to help overcome those blocks. So if anybody's seen the film Don't Look Up, and if we have time in the Q&A, we might come back to this. But if you have seen it, or if you haven't, please watch it, because it is a really, really great illustration of a lot of the climate psychology aspects around defense mechanisms and difficulties in facing a very, very difficult truth, or an inconvenient truth, as we know from that previous film. So Don't Look Up is about a meteor coming to Earth, and the scientists are trying to tell people, going on all sorts of shows, and, you know, basically everyone just wants happy news and entertainment, and they don't really want to hear what's actually happening. So it's really very, it was a very obvious kind of comment on the climate catastrophe that is coming our way. So some definitions really, but firstly, a great quote, which is, "Our collective equanimity in the face of the unprecedented risk posed by climate change is perhaps the greatest mystery of our age." Paul Hoggett is one of the main, there's a lot of key authors, and I'll come to a few of those, but Paul Hoggett is a major writer in this field. So a definition is concerned, climate psychology is concerned with emotions and the social and mental processes that have contributed to the ecological and climate crisis and our responses and processes of adaptation to it. That's the Climate Psychology Alliance, CPA. Again, as I said, there is, and I've just added to it a bit here, there is more about the, so I'm just, can't quite see the bottom bit, that's it. I've added about the layers here, that defenses, you've probably heard of psychological defenses, really originating from Freudian psychoanalysis. And we think in psychology in terms of cognitive or conscious kind of thinking and unconscious drives and defenses. So we'll be looking a little bit at some of those. So basically, where there is anxiety and fear, which we all have if we really face this. And obviously everybody on this call is very likely to have properly faced this. Then you will have felt some of the deepest anxiety there is. And then all of us will have had some psychological defenses. So I will get to those, and we can all identify what we do, because defenses are necessary to help us to cope with daily life, while we also try to take on the truth and the reality of what's happening. So the psychological roots of the climate crisis is, if you like, the first stage. So as I said, we have to know how we got here in order to know where we're going. It does overlap with psychological responses. So if you like, there are, in psychology, we sometimes think of predisposing factors. And then we think of things that are keeping it going, perpetuating factors, and they tend to overlap. But initially, I'm going to mention evolutionary psychology. You might have heard about evolutionary psychology. The Americans like this very much. But this isn't really, climate psychology in the UK is very much, I just talk about the field for a minute. It doesn't really include evolutionary psychology. What I'm talking about today will be some strands and not really within the UK climate psychology. This is being defined by the Climate Psychology Alliance. But I wanted to go a bit broader today. I think you'll find it quite interesting, and I'll point out these different strands. So evolutionary psychology is a strand that explains how humans ended up being the fastest ever species to overshoot their carrying capacity of their ecosystem. So I hope some of my talking is familiar to you. I did a zoology degree before I was a psychologist, so I did ecology, and carrying capacity is something that you might be familiar with. But basically, we know that humans are overshooting the boundaries of the planet at a rapid rate. And so evolutionary psychology is thinking about what it is about human minds and brains that's made us firstly expand so rapidly, and secondly consume so much. And we are the only species to have external sort of energy sources that we create. But I won't get into this too much. I've got to keep an eye on the time. But basically, there's our evolution, including massive ability to adapt, to create tools, obviously. We do abstraction in our heads, we cooperate and coordinate. All these things add together to create a very rapid ability to use resources. And then there's evolutionary psychology talks a bit about maybe peacocking, sort of conspicuous consumption, maybe to attract a mate. There's also some neuroscience and biology around how consumption has become addictive, and that's because our animal brain used to be excited by the hunting and other threats, but now the adrenaline is through drugs and shopping and so forth. But anyway, So evolutionary psychology, I'm not so keen on it. It's very deterministic. There are many human societies that exist within nature and not going out of balance. They exist in a steady state, and it's more hopeful in that regard that we can, as in human nature, we are able to live within our carrying capacity. So eco-psychology, you might have heard of eco-psychology. So that's a field, again, slightly separate from the climate psychology field, but I'm including everything here. It's a field that really says the problem is our disconnection from nature. And this overlaps as well with a bit of a circle where our disconnection from nature, which sort of probably really started around the agricultural, the beginning of agriculture, where we began to use and extract, and especially where animals were concerned, that the relationship with nature turned into one of extraction, and there was a psychological disconnect began to grow. And they, in eco-psychology, would say that this actually unconsciously and over time causes psychological problems, and that this in turn causes us to get to find quick fixes like consumption to make ourselves feel better, and then the consumption and destruction from that causes this vicious circle. So nature being out there and us not properly connected to it is a problem, and eco-psychology then leads into psychological therapy, which is about reconnection with nature. So a famous book in the climate psychology field, and author Sally Weintraub, is the psychological roots of the climate catastrophe or crisis. I've got it here, and neoliberalism, which is it's a critique of the exceptionalism, which is that we're all special, and the culture of uncare. So this might not apply to people on this call, but it does apply to the culture of neoliberalism, being mainly since the 80s, sort of profit at all costs, really. So adding on to that disconnection from nature, we then develop this, and we could link it to capitalism, but there can be different types of capitalism. Neoliberalism has a particular, if you like, aspect around the individualism, consumption, and the main thing being this kind of narcissistic exceptionalism where, a bit like the person driving at 120 miles an hour down the fast lane, I'm different, I don't have to obey the law, and everybody else is trying to. So that's exceptionalism, but in this case, it's neoliberal exceptionalism that Sally Weintraub is talking about. The culture of uncare is this increasing, and we see it in social media and everything. I mean, it's terribly bad for human psychology that there is less and less care about. I mean, obviously, there's also, parts of the population are caring more and more. But again, going back to why we have a problem is that there's been this lack of care. And this includes social climate injustice. So us not caring enough or closing our minds to what's happening in other parts of the world, it gets difficult to bear. So another author talks about compulsive consumption, that particularly with social media, there's a lot of shaming and envy, and it motivates compulsive and conspicuous consumption. And obviously, as I mentioned, consumption is the biggest part of our overshoot. There's always a field of cognitive and behavioral psychology. So the cognitive biases, you might have heard of some of these. I'm not going to stay with them now because we've got a lot of content to get through. But just to a nod to cognitive and behavioral psychology, there's a lot said. And actually, I don't know if you can see me. There's a great book. If you can, you might not be able to see it. No, I don't think you can. There's a book called Don't Even Think About It. a bit like the Don't Look Up film. But that's all about the cognitive biases, and I recommend it. It's great fun. The subtitle is Why Our Brains Are Wired to Ignore Climate Change. It's by George Marshall. So, and it's more cognitive than psychological defenses, which is, so this is what we'll come to more shortly. The denial and disavowal and apathy is a defense against the anxiety. Again, these are also part of our responses, which is coming next, but psychological roots are also about why we're not bending the curve that I showed at the beginning. And these are all psychological reasons for that. So if we go into the responses, emotional, cognitive, behavioral, unconscious, you will have heard of eco-anxiety, and in a bit I'll talk a little bit of a critique about that phrase, and some of the individual kind of location of being concerned about the climate crisis and how that's being used by those who are, if you like, more with the fossil fuel interests, and would like to individualize all this and maybe pathologize. Also, I think many of us will have found that some people who aren't there yet in terms of being with their feelings of eco-distress can look at us if we're anxious and think there's something wrong with us, or that we're a bit too sensitive in some way, because they're not yet there. And that includes so many people around. I imagine on this call, everybody knows somebody quite close, or mainly the majority of people who you don't feel are yet properly connected with what's actually happening. They might be intellectually, but not in terms of the feelings. So if you've really woken up to what's happening, you will feel anxiety, grief, guilt, rage, despair, helplessness, hopelessness, depression, and overwhelm. It is what the healthy response is. It doesn't feel healthy. You can feel like you're ill, but you're not. And that's a big message we're giving. So solastalgia is a phrase that the climate psychologists are using, which is the pain of losing when we love our environment and nature. It's a particular pain of losing that. That's solace is, if you like, comfort, and algia being the pain. So, but it's specifically about our environment. So I also found a university reader on aggression and violence and rapid climate change. So I'll show a model in a minute. But we do know that a polarization and conflict, as I say, there are many, many strands in climate psychology. So I'm whizzing over these, and I'm sorry if it feels a bit fast. There's a field around activist burnout. We need more around this, because there's a real thing, because clearly with all these feelings in that eco-distress, people then work too hard and combine that, those feelings with working very, very hard. There's a lot of burnout. And I've been one of them, to be honest, but doomism, interesting how negatively that's been constructed, but there people might know of the deep adaptation kind of literature, and their ownership of the word, or doomster, because they are turning it around on those who try to make us feel apathetic if we do see some doom ahead, and things are pretty bad when you look at the science. Paradigm distress is another phrase, and cognitive dissonance. Some of this I'm just giving you the concepts, and we haven't got time to go into each of them, but really we are living within a neoliberal culture. We have lived with all this consumption around us, and the guilt obviously is there. Cognitive dissonance being that, oh, I might, just I last weekend I went to Sheffield, and I often get the train, but I drove for various reasons, and I had a lot of cognitive dissonance. Paradigm distress is living in a time where we can't really get away from the fact that it's all so destructive of our environment, and yet our whole lives are created like this. And the fossil fuel interests and others want to individualize action. They want to make it our fault or our responsibility to make it all better. But we do need a lot of change at the systems and organizational infrastructure level to be able to live differently. And then activation of psychological defenses, as I say, that can be a very healthy thing, in the sense that we do need to obviously find a way of being with the feelings, which is really important to properly give meaning to what's happening, overcome intellectualization, which I'll talk about in a minute, whilst also managing and not breaking down. We will break down, to be honest, at times. I want to normalize that because, again, like the Don't Look Up film, you know, the two scientists were breaking down pretty much because it's almost impossible when you know what's coming. But psychological defenses can help, but they are often in this instance with climate change, unhelpful. You don't need to be able to read this. It's just a very helpful curve based on Fisher's transition curve, which is used for various things. It happens that often there is this big U shape where you go down as you transition, and it could be, I mentioned grief earlier. You know, many people know the stages of grief. And they do overlap and they go back and forward, but you know, they are pretty good in terms of the initial stages being more around unawareness or denial, the later stages being around acceptance, making meaning, but the bit in the middle can be really, really difficult as one goes through the pain of really coming to terms with it. So what we see at the bottom there is depression and collapse, and there's a little branch off to the right there where people can maybe not go into the more not positive exactly, but an even more negative place, where they stay in a hopeless place, and there's a lot of maybe self-hatred, self-harm. This curve Caroline Hickman originally did for talking to adolescents, because young people are particularly affected. But I would say that little negative right-hand branch could also be the more violent. And when we become really, really under strain, unfortunately, there will be, if you like, a bit of a fork in the road around those who go very, very, maybe even altruistic, being able to self-sacrifice, be communal, and those who are would tend towards more violence and more psychological defense. And we are seeing that in the States, actually, in terms of, and you know, in general polarization of politics and some of the violence that happened on January the 6th. Anyway, another model. Again, you don't have time to take this all in, but I'm hoping to be able to come back. I mentioned to Jane that if there's anything, each of these slides I could do a whole presentation on, right? So this lovely framework comes from clinical psychology, which is my profession. And we tend to be thought of as CBT therapists, but we're much more than that. And in fact, other models are much more suitable. Anyway, the power threat meaning framework comes mainly from the trauma field. It really helps in conceptualizing trauma because power is in there. And you know, trauma is all about feeling powerless or being powerless, having some people having power over us, maybe. Because in clinical psychology, when I say trauma, I mean interpersonal trauma, complex trauma. That means usually abuse, and we are all being abused in some ways by our global leaders not doing anything enough about huge catastrophe. So there's a threat, you have a response, there's meaning made of that, which can be helpful or not helpful. You access strengths, but it's really thinking about where the power is and what power you have. And it's been adapted for climate crisis by Gareth Morgan, who is now with the Climate Psychology Alliance. I do, if you're interested in this, do look up the Climate Psychology Alliance. That's a really great website. But this actual model won't be on there, but Gareth Morgan he's a colleague of mine actually at the University of Leicester, as well as now the youth lead for the Climate Psychology Alliance. So a rather text-heavy slide. You don't need to read it all, but you can see that we're making sense of all these different ways of responding. So this is just one part of the model as applied for climate crisis psychology, where there's threat responses, and it's not exhausted, but denial's in there. We're going to come to that again, and activism. So that being maybe the other end of the scale, and various things in between. So the function of these threat responses being to regulate yourself. So I talked earlier about maybe there's sometimes our responses are about being overwhelmed. Intellectualizing's there, which I want to come on to, because I think we can all do that. I know I can. And there can be a little bit of, if you don't mind me saying, a little bit of a gender difference here, where we see in the field, you know, maybe males tending towards more wanting to study science and solutions and so forth, or actions, and there's more predominance of females at climate cafes where emotions are talked about. And I think this is really important, because obviously psychology worries, if you like, about masculine constructions being that, you know, males are less find it less easy to express or engage with feelings. So that is a worry. We do need people to be able to process the feelings in order to cope, because otherwise it goes underground and can come out in all sorts of other directions. So regulating feelings, maintaining a sense of control and agency. These are functions of our threat responses. Protection from danger, striving for a place within a social group. So you might have had a quick look at some of these, but there are various protections. There's prepping there as well, which can, you know, in my mind, is a reasonably sensible thing to do. Sorry, this is I had to take a photograph of this. This is from this reader I found on violence and aggression, a social psychology. So again, different fields coming together to look at the psychology of climate. Unfortunately, this research, so they did this model and then they did all the research to back it up, and generally to show that violence is massively on the increase, and we're seeing this with wars as well. And obviously probably everybody on this course this call does think in a sort of systemic way, that everything is connected. And there are various theories now about meta-crisis, polycrisis, the great simplification, various things that this is all one great big, and the financial system being unsustainable. So wars are part of this. So the indirect effects. So the direct effects are heat, and all the research shows that as one gets hotter, you get more irritable, and aggression and violence increase. And it's just really a physiological mechanism, like hangry or anything like that. Indirect effects are really the strain of economic instability and the sort of failed crops, and the polarizations that are happening, the massive migrations that are going to happen and happening already. So that's another field. It will feel like it's jumping around a little bit, but going back to defenses. So what we have here is well-known climate denial, still rife, particularly in the US, encouraged by the fossil fuel interests, being politicized in the sense that, as we know, many aspects are in terms of right-wing politics, a need to identify things as woke and attack it. So climate change denial is still there, even though the science is so very obviously saying what a problem there is. Soft denial is what maybe climate psychology is much more interested in. And in psychoanalysis, it's called disavowal, which is where we can't face a truth. We just can't face it. A truth has happened, maybe a loss, and something in us just cannot accept it. So soft denial really is a phrase used now in climate psychology as a form of disavowal. Various ways this can happen, and we all do these, or some of them at times. Diffusion of responsibility might be, other countries are doing many more emissions than we are. We shouldn't have to. We're doing okay relatively, or other people are flying and I'm not, so I can do this, or whatever. But diffusing it in some way. I'll come straight to maybe splitting and compartmentalization. Splitting can be various things. It can be a them and us split, or it can be a thought and feeling split, which is very common in climate psychology. So, on our talks here, we'll be thinking much more. And when we look at graphs and so forth, we might split off our feelings. So feelings get repressed and our thoughts are split off. And then we are, if you like, everything's a bit drained of meaning and feeling. Compartmentalization might be, I really can't think about this now. Or, I've just got too much on my plate to really let myself think about the climate crisis. I'm going to speed up because I've gone on way too much. But I mentioned about intellectualization. So this is, a lot of us love learning, but you need to beware a little bit if all you're doing is reading, studying graphs and Twitter and so forth, and you're not actually being with the feelings. I hope to get as far as one of a key wonderful resource called Active Hope Training, which helps you connect with your feelings around it, as well as come through the other side into action. Routinization is just burying yourself in your routine and avoiding, turning the other way. Another busy slide. This is because of another approach being social constructionist psychology, narrative psychology, about discourses in society, but they've broken it down here and how unhelpful they are really. So doomism is in there, if you like, because doomism is seen as causing apathy. But again, I think we're beginning to rethink that a little bit. Policy perfectionism, like, criticism of policies because they're not, not perfect. They're not going to do the whole thing. Well, we need to do what we can, but I won't go into all of these, but again, just so that you can see the breadth of what climate psychology is about. We're looking at discourse analysis, looks at things like media and way people talk, and that it analyzes them for themes. A discourse, I mean, it's such a sad sort of cartoon, but funny as well. This young koala has a mental health problem. So you might be familiar with the idea that, attributing the problem to the person who's concerned, or the koala in this case. So the koala's been seen as having a problem when all the trees have been cut down. And really, that's our worry about this idea of eco-anxiety, that it become more like seen as a bit of a diagnosis, if you like. And clinical psychology has always been, if you like, fighting diagnoses, categorizations of individuals when there are layers of context, and we need to be looking at the context. So what we're saying is it's normal. It's normal to be that quivering person or koala, to be breaking down as there is climate and ecological breakdown. So then the third, so what we've done really is the psychological roots, the psychological responses, and then there's sort of psychological approaches, really, and this sort of overlaps with resources and organizations. But the Climate Psychology Alliance has a directory of psychotherapists. A big thing about that, I'm not actually putting myself on there for now, but the big thing is that the psychotherapists will have been or be at the same place as you are, because to be honest, and I can say in my profession, most of my colleagues were still not awake and aware to it. They would say something like, yeah, I know it's a real worry, and some of them would even say, yeah, I'm aware that I push it away, I just can't seem to connect with it, and they're aware of their own defenses. But so having a psychotherapist who really have been through their own grief and anxiety with this and feelings. Ecotherapy is that sort of, walking out in nature with a therapist, really connecting with nature, or talking about ways to connect with nature. And again, that comes into the active hope training as well. So there's coaching. There's an amazing book, but it might be a bit heavy, but it's called Holding the Hope. And it is for psychotherapists, but it shows how climate psychology is bringing together counselors, coaches, life coaches, psychotherapists, Freudian psychoanalysts, clinical psychologists. We're all grouping together, and then there's researchers as well, and it's beginning to coalesce into a field, but it's a relatively new field. Climate cafes, so active hope training I've talked about, and climate cafes and active hope training, I'm hoping in the last 2 minutes to get to in a minute, really, really worth taking part in. Radical hope is a concept that's about deep hope and not naive hope. Naive hope being sort of, oh, it'll all be okay. Radical hope is I'm going to find ways to really deeply connect with others and work out how to live. Deep adaptation overlaps with that, which you might have heard about. There's now a very recent Open University free climate psychology course I'm just plowing through at the moment. It doesn't include all that I've got, but it's got quite a lot of it. Organizations, Eco Psychology UK, Climate Psychology Alliance, XR Psychologists, all working away on this. I won't go into coping with eco-anxiety now, but a nice little pie chart that comes out of a paper. Again, a nice little cartoon to sort of think about how we have to pretend to be feeling bright about it all, and people don't really accept us talking about it. It's actually quite taboo to say, actually, 70% of species have died globally, and it's getting worse, and all our pollinators are dying off, and we're going to have more and more wildfires and all this sort of thing. People they really do not seem to welcome it. It's hard to talk about. So climate cafes are adapted from something already that's been around a long time, death cafes, where you have a taboo topic and you can talk about it without knowing everyone's there to talk about it too. I realize I've run out of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you, it's basically what I really recommend coming to a climate cafe, but we're not talking about actions, science, any of that. We're trying to bypass those defenses the work that reconnects is part of active hope, which starts off with doing gratitude training, then going into your pain, and the gratitude helps with that. And then you see with new eyes, feel yourself being part of a bigger system, and that your little bit will ripple out, and you go forward and take action. And I do recommend having a look at that. So I'll stop sharing now, and we'll think about, I don't know how much time we've got really, Jenny. That was a real whistle stop. Sorry, people, if it was too fast.
It was a real whistle stop, but it was very, very good whistle stop. I mean, I think there's clearly so much there. So thank you so much, Emmie, for trying so hard to squeeze so much into so little time. I really appreciate it. I think that was incredible. Emmie did say part of the way through that she thought she was going to try and cover too much tonight, though. So we might like to invite her back. So I think perhaps later on this year we'll have a second session on climate psychology. And if there are particular aspects of what Emmie has touched on there that maybe we wanted to go into more detail for a future meeting, then we can do that. Does anybody have any particular questions, comments, thoughts? Please put your real or virtual hand up if you do. Claire.
Thanks. I just quite a specific question. You had on the graph where you go through the dip through the Hickman curve.
Yes.
What was the reframing the climate justice on the way up? Sorry if it's really specific.
Yes, that is very specific. I would need to read the paper, I think. I read some of it, but that might be something we can come back to if we're interested in the Hickman curve, because she's also it's also in my Holding the Hope book. So I will come back to, and I can come back to you separately about that, Claire.
Hickman, is she Climate Psychology Alliance? Is she?
Yes, she's there. Yes, that's right. So she's quite well known actually in many papers. But yeah, reframing climate injustice. I'm not sure what that is, but certainly it's a big aspect I didn't really mention as well in my presentation about the feelings about climate injustice, and also defense against that as well. How we are those very wealthy people that are causing the problems for those who haven't caused those emissions. It's a hard one to get your head around, really, isn't it?
Really hard. I guess just yes, Mike, you've got your hand up, I think.
Yes, if I'm not interrupting. I think actually George Marshall did a talk on TED, which is available online on the subject of not being wired up for really paying too much attention. And I don't think we are, because I mean, several of us here have reached the age where our friends are popping off, and unless they're immediate friends or immediate family, really, when we get very upset and we miss them, the others just sort of fade into the distance. And we don't really pay much attention to the fact that we're likely to join them very shortly. And I think this is the same as what is happening with climate change. Unless people are adversely affected themselves, their house got flooded, then yes, they're very worried. But people in Northamptonshire generally aren't. I remember thinking back when it snowed every winter, when there were loads of butterflies in the garden. There was small and large tortoise shells. I haven't seen a small tortoise shell for years.
Large tortoise shells were extinct in the UK now, I believe.
Are they? Yeah. That'd be why.
Well, you can still see small ones around occasionally.
And actually, that two big points there, Mike. I mean, one of the just picking up that last one, people might have heard of the shifting baselines aspect, where as newer generations come, then they've never seen these things, and so their normal is something that to us is abnormal. So the shifting baselines thing, and your point actually about things being further away, really, really good one. And actually that has been thought about in climate psychology, and especially George Marshall actually. But he actually, in one of his chapters, says how even those who have had climate catastrophes can still deny it's climate change. And he goes into some of the cognitive biases around that. So even when it's right, you know, happening to you, you can still get the denial. But yes, there's a neuroscience aspect of how we only see threat right next to us and we don't see the background. And some people might know the very funny video where you're asked to count some people who are passing a ball and how many times they pass the ball. And then at the end they say, did you see the gorilla? And there'd been a person in a gorilla suit doing this in the background and they hadn't even seen it. So, you know, you just look at the things right in front of you, especially when you're threatened or threat, and you just see the immediate challenge. And our brains are wired that way.
That's a problem I have when I'm playing chess. Unbelievably, I become concentrated on a small part of the board, and once my opponents realise, they move things the other, and quite devastating. But I also went to a talk this week, or presentation on tourism, where the council are trying, having binned it 25 years ago, they're now trying to revive their equivalent of tourist information and the like. The people from Sedgebrook Hall were there, and they gave a wonderful talk on what they're doing and how they're getting government grants to put in combined heat and power and reduce water consumption and all this. And I thought, oh gosh, they'll be interested then in that. Christopher Markham, who was one of the first people to record weather in Northamptonshire, had his weather station at Sedgebrook Hall. So I went over and told them, and I thought they'd be absolutely fascinated. But of course, there's no money in it for them, so they weren't in the least bit interested. But they're being driven by rules and law and finances. Because finance is being pushed in their direction, because they've got targets to hit, they are acting to reduce CO2 emissions on their site. It's not because they're in the least bit interested in climate change, but they're very enthusiastic about hitting their targets.
Yeah. I'm just going to pick up on a comment that David Garlick has put into the comments, which I think probably most of us can share, which is, he says it's nice to know what I have and I'm going through is normal. And I think it is, definitely. And I guess I'd just like to say two things in response to that. One is that Climate Action West Northamptonshire holds climate cafes every month. So those are places where you can kind of open up to those feelings, hopefully in a safe space. And the other thing is, I personally do have felt for quite a while that it's you have to be a little bit open and a little bit raw. It's just how you have to live your life, I think. If you're going to do the right things that you need to do for climate change, otherwise the defences just become second nature.
Yes, well said. That's right. They are more automatic. So the Active Hope training is an online package, very, very accessible, very sort of enjoyable, but very moving as well. And it brings in all sorts of different theories and approaches, including ways to sort of really connect with the feelings and some moving videos. I do recommend it. Just looking up Active Hope training, you can't, it's free, and you know, it really helps as well. So something about the gratitude, because you know, I've been feeling the same. I've been really through my own journey and found the Active Hope training really, really helpful. It is aiming at unblocking, so maybe not so much for people on this call. It's a lot of it's about unblocking. It's saying there's this big gap between how much we know there's a problem, some of us, and how much action we're taking, and it wants to close that gap because it says about this block. and many, oh, I think that's
Sorry.
it.
Yeah.
That's all right. Yeah. So but even if you're someone taking action, you don't think there's much difference, it's really worth doing that package anyway. I found it very therapeutic. But yeah, climate cafes are the other big thing. And there are also Climate Psychology Alliance climate cafes, and the CPA offer 3 free sessions with a psychotherapist. So really worth going on their website as well. But yes, thinking about how other people are defending, if you like, themselves against going to these places is a really important aspect of it.
David?
Yeah, again, following on the defense mechanisms, my mechanism at the moment is beginning to stockpile tins of this, that, and the other, not on a huge scale, but yeah, that's where I've gone with mine.
Yes, and you know, I find myself doing that in almost little spurts of obsessive behavior like that. It's actually quite adaptive because, you know, our supply chains are very, very fragile. Food is going to be an issue, and things can collapse. You know, I think this is the thing.
Claire, other Claire.
Yeah, it's a comment really. If I think about the future of humanity, I mean, the comfort I get is actually outdoors, sort of reconnecting with nature.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, a lot of mental health is a comment that you made before about that disconnect, you know, in society. But then there's the kind of irony that we're moving more and more into a kind of robotic AI dominated world where, you know, young people are dependent, and this is another form of addiction, and how their communication with nature there is this huge barrier, which is technology. And it, you know, it kind of reminds me of those awful kind of dystopian films where the landscape is brown and, you know, the green has been destroyed. So it's almost as if, you know, we need to connect with nature because we have evolved from planet, you know, along with nature, but we kind of seem to be moving away from it. And I think that's a strange one to actually have to deal with when, you know, policy is being made, and you know, how we can control AI, because there will be other mental conditions that will arise because of that. And again, the climate is pushed out. I mean, the idea of using technology to reduce carbon or to extract it from, I just don't, I mean, it's not there yet. You know, we really have got to deal with carbon reduction.
Well, that's right. And that first graph was basically showing what's happening with the current policies, which is basically really, really bad because technology can't save us. But I agree about young people. Lots of very, very worrying aspects generally about mental health and young people and all the various challenges, and that escape into social media and what that's doing and the separation from reality. But yeah, nature, if people, you know, hopefully there becomes more and more of a push towards ways of connecting with nature, even in urban environments. I didn't quite catch that. It looked interesting, but something about growing your own, because I'm doing that now as well.
Bryony has said, my eldest asked if we could grow lentils or chickpeas alongside our other veg, and maybe she should think about that for self-sufficiency as well as connecting with nature.
A bit of protein. And it also, I mean, you know, in the end, humans are going to need to get back to the land more. You know, in the sense of if everything does need to simplify rather and become more local, but growing your own is a lovely thing to do. More and more self-sufficiency and independence does make you feel better in that way, and it is connecting with the soil, which we know is a wonderful living thing. that is also very threatened by our current agricultural systems, as Rupert.
David, sorry. Yeah.
Go for it.
Oh.
Yeah, that don't rely on. Well, I suppose that will be another conversation, won't it? That Rupert can probably. But yeah, I imagine.
Probably quite a long conversation, I think.
Yes.
But Rupert, do you want to just briefly answer that?
At the time.
Well, David, I wrote a huge response to your thing on corn exchange, and there are lots of crops that don't need pollination.
Yes.
Don't need insects,
Yeah.
and I think it's very bad that we refer to all insects as pollinators. Half the insects are pests. So get that in your heads.
I think the approved word for entomologist is invertebrates, isn't it? That covers everything, and it doesn't distinguish between their functions. But anyway, what were you going to say, David?
But if we don't have pollinators, the others are not that important because they're not going to be helping us to feed ourselves. So it's the pollinators that are key, and if we lose them,
everyth's key. Everything's key. It's all part of a connected ecosystem. You just can't keep pulling out the blocks from the Jenga pile and expecting it to stand up.
Yes.
If we don't have pollinated crops, then there will be nothing to stand up.
But most crops, David, don't need pollinating. Your wheat doesn't need pollinating. Your rice doesn't need pollinating. Your, most of the things you can think of don't need much pollinating.
Even for the seeds.
Yeah.
Well, that's a seed crop. That's quite separate.
We better not get onto it. But I would say that the Regenesis book is really good in talking about how actually what we have thought of as pests, you can, if you get back to normal ecosystems, it all controls itself, which is interesting. I know Rupert, you don't, but he makes a very, very strong case for letting ecosystems and insects do their thing, because they will be predated. But anyway, we're getting on to...
Sorry, we're a bit off topic. I think this is probably something we ought to discuss at a future meeting. Peter, have you got your hand up? And then I think after that we'll wrap up and move on.
No, really. I hate the word pest. I'm an ecologist. Let's not only talk about insects pollinating, snails pollinate some things. Thank goodness it's been realised slugs and snails are quite a good thing for gardens and so on. Any attempt to get interfering with lack of knowledge, even using such words as pest, is completely taboo in my head.
Thank you. Okay.
It's interesting, we've gone off topic when I was talking about how that can happen with psychological defences.
Such a good point, Emmie. Yes. And I'm going to, before we move on to the final part of the meeting, I'm going to, in a shameless act of promotion of the organisation, can I say, and I'm not sure if this is one of the things that you whistled past in your presentation, Emmie, one of the things that I found really helped me is to be part of an engaged community such as Corn.
Yes.
And without further ado, I'm going to say huge thanks to Emmie for that. I think that's been incredibly enlightening. There will be a recording of the meeting, there will be notes, and Emmie's slides will be shared within the next few days. So I hope there'll be plenty to follow up on in that to teach us a little bit more. But thank you very much indeed.
Yes, I just want to confirm that one of the slides did put community engagement, but I would agree completely that and taking some sort of action are the most therapeutic things we can do.
Thank you. Right, because we are now very short of time, I'm going to pass over to Declan Ryan. Thank you for joining us, Declan. We've been put in touch with Declan by one of our Corn members, Peter Doveston, because he's part of a grant application for a research project at the University of Northampton, which was related to actions that we can take around net zero. That is a huge simplification of something that I really don't understand. So perhaps, Declan, you'd like to explain it better and tell us how we might be able to help.
Pretty good effort there, Jim. Thank you for having me along. I'll only take a couple of minutes of time here before we wrap up, and thanks to Emmie for that talk as well. Really interesting listening there. Hi everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Declan Ryan. I'm an associate professor in physical activity and health at the University of Northampton. Most of my research is very close to practice. It's about trying to help stimulate action and change. I tend to focus on helping with access to green spaces and also around active travel as well. So I work closely with colleagues within West Northants Council, for example, North Hampshire Sport and other organisations. We have a bit of a partnership known as the Northampton's Active Quarter, which you may have heard of if you live in Northampton, which is where the majority of our work has been so far. We're quite new into this area and developing it all the time. I'm just posting a link into there just in case colleagues are interested. Listeners are interested in that piece around the Active Quarter. In terms of this grant application, this is just one potential project of a few different opportunities that we're developing. The grant is a big grant using a research hub to help with progress towards net zero, whether that's developing solutions, assessing the effectiveness of solutions, or working to capture the views of the public to help inform decision making, planning and policies and other sorts like that. And so that's kind of where we are at the minute. The grant is up to 5.5 million and it's for a 5-year duration. It's focused in Northamptonshire, and the area we're interested in is around transport and the built environment aspects of net zero. What we're going to do around that particular grant is I'm going to send Jane a link to a short survey, because I appreciate there's a lot of members at call, and she's going to kindly distribute that for me with the notes from today's meeting. And it's just would be wonderful to get some input from you all to help ensure that community voice is being heard in the design of this research grant. It's particularly looking at the health aspects of moving to net zero, and health is a very big word, so very keen to hear how you perceive health and what measures and of health are important to you. That stems across physical, mental, social aspects of health. So as I say, that deadline is coming up towards the end of April. We hope that we can get some sort of face-to-face or online group discussion together as well to help review our application and make any last-minute changes to it. So it gets a bit of scrutiny from public there on that, which will be fantastic. But we will send more communications out on that shortly. And that won't be the only opportunity to engage. I'll put an open offer, Jane, if people are interested in my work, then I'd be lovely to speak at one of the upcoming Corn meetings. Very happy. There's a thumbs up. Lovely. So happy to talk about the stuff we've been doing with the Active Quarter, for example. And also we're looking to do some community engagement as well, going into some around green spaces particularly. So this grant is not the only time to engage with you or engage with me. Hopefully that we're at the start of a journey here together, and we can get to know a little bit more about one another and how we might support each other moving forward, so we can all help with this kind of progress to net zero, promoting active travel, promoting access to green spaces as well. All topics that came up in discussion tonight off the back of Emmie's talk, which is fantastic. So thanks for that opportunity to chat, Jane. Just a reminder, we'll be sending out a bit of a survey with these notes, so you can help contribute to this grant, and it will tell you a bit more about the grant within that survey as well, to give you some more context.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Peter?
Yeah, when I come to these meetings, as I don't always, but I feel I need to contact some people that I've heard, seen on the screen.
Yeah.
Is it always via you? I mean, I need to recontact Emmie for some therapy, and I need to recontact Declan perhaps to give some therapy or some information at least. How easy do you make it for us to do that?
And so what I would normally suggest is, well, if any of the people that you mention are happy for you to contact them, then perhaps they would share their email address now. Otherwise, if it's people that are not on the call, or they don't do that, by all means email me and I will pass on your message, and if people are happy to get in touch with you direct after that, then we can leave it there. Yeah. Obviously for reasons which everyone knows about, I can't just give people's email addresses out sort of randomly,
Yeah.
although I'm sure they wouldn't mind, but you still have to be careful. Okay. Does anyone else have any? I had a very, very like 2-second rack of my brains before the meeting. I didn't feel there was anything else that was absolutely pressing to update people with. But actually, I guess the one thing we probably do need to talk about is the fact that West Northamptonshire Council is about to launch a consultation on their draft local plan. We will be putting together some notes on how you might want to think about responding to that. It is an extremely hefty document. It's fairly readable. It's not particularly challenging, but it's sort of, I think it's around 700 odd pages, so it's not an easy read by any stretch of the imagination. But it is, as I'm sure everybody here knows, it's an important one. And where there's things in there that we feel needs to be challenged, then we need to make every effort to do that. But we'll send out more on that later. Is there anything else that anybody would like to say, or anything that I should have said that I haven't? Mike?
Yes, can I do a quick advert?
Please do.
I can't remember if I've already sent it to you, but 3 weeks tonight, the local branch of the Royal Met Society, we've got an online talk, Net Zero, what can science do to help?
I think I might have already
put
that on our What's On. I think I found it through another route.
Oh, right.
I think so. Is it on the 11th of April?
It's 3 weeks today.
Oh, is that 3 weeks today? My maths isn't that good. Sorry. Yes. Okay. So yes, I think I've actually already signed up for it, and I think I have put it on our What's On. But yes, and just sort of a general plug for that as well.
Yes, it's the 11th of April. Yeah.
Where we sort of come across events.
Net Zero, how can science help policy?
Yeah, especially local events, but also ones like this that are online but very relevant. We do try and put them on our What's On so that people can be aware of them and go to them. So yeah, hopefully see somebody there. It's an online event. Emmie. Oh. I think I've lost connection, haven't I? Emmie? Go on mute, Emmie.
Yeah, Jane, you froze there.
Yeah,
Did
sorry, I know.
name?
Yes, I did. Yeah, sorry. I think I've got a message about my connection. Anyway, do carry on.
Yes, that's it. I was just wondering if anyone, we're running out of time, but had been to the drop-ins about the tree strategy. I gather they're doing some aerial kind of project. Oh, Mick.
Yes.
Yeah, I did go to a drop-in, as you would expect. They are putting the strategy together, so they are basically asking for views and understandings, and had lots of maps out on the table. And I spoke to the lady who was doing it, who her card, Sarah Shortley. And I've copied a couple of people in on, I was talking about more trees now, and that initiative primarily so that I get a sort of note in there. I think there's others will want to take a different view on street trees and put their views on that. I think they were calling back on the committee, the task force that they put together about 2 years ago, and then they put a paper into
there's a task and finish group, I think, wasn't there? It's been crawling towards a conclusion.
I mean, my main concern on the whole thing of this is that they only have one tree officer at the moment. They're meant to have 3, and within that committee paper they said there were 3 options, and the first option was reactive service only, and therefore they might write a strategy, but if they then put it on the shelf because they only have one tree officer, we're wasting our time basically. So
exactly.
I think that's the key point.
Yeah, and just to say that Russell Horsey, who is I guess a word I'm not very good at saying, arboriculturalist, and the consultant who's leading a lot of the work on the WNC tree strategy, is going to be talking to our meeting in June. So hopefully that will be interesting. Yeah, I tried to sign up for the online tree strategy one, but it was the day before and it had already closed, which I was really annoyed about.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It is now exactly 9 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
I guess so. One thing I probably just want to say very briefly is that our next meeting in March, I think it's March the 18th, but don't hold me to that. We will have Councillor Jonathan Harris talking to us about the WNC climate strategy, because they are about to have one. Very, very exciting. And it's only taken well over 3 years. So, you know.
April, I think you mean. April.
April. Oh, yeah, you're right. This is March, isn't it? Oh, my God. Thank you. Sorry. It's been a busy day. So just one very quick pause, if anybody else has got anything that they particularly want to say. Otherwise, I shall thank you all very much for attending. Thanks again to Emmie for a really, really interesting talk. And we look forward to having you back later in the year. Thank you.
Oh, I'll send you something about therapy.